The Booster Pack Throwback podcast is part of the Booster Pack Network. For more TCG-related content, visit theboosterpacknetwork.com. Hosting for this show is sponsored by Category 1 Games, the go-to shop for all of your classic TCG needs. Find your favorites or discover something new at category1games.com.
Hello and welcome to Booster Pack Throwback. My name is Rands and this is the show on the Booster Pack Network where we can unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible games each and every episode. And of course, today's episode will be no different as we're going to be traveling back to the first and second wave of the collectible trading card game genre's history to explore a group of games that we haven't really discussed much on this network so far. Yes, these games are clustered together by the fact that they were all created and designed by an exclusive group of people, one of whom I will have the very good fortune of introducing in just a moment. The other thing that united these games is that, for the most part, they were all published by Precedence Entertainment. And if you haven't heard of Precedence Entertainment, throughout the 1990s, they were one of the top 3 collectible trading card game publishers in the English-speaking gaming industry. Yes, all of their games were based on world-famous IPs, and they came from many different facets of popular culture. Whether that was converting a hit TV series like Babylon 5, huge selling video games like Tomb Raider, or even an action movie icon like Predator, Precedence Entertainment gave each of those games a distinct and innovative collectible game experience. Now, joining me today is somebody who is intimately responsible for those games' creation and somebody who will be able to share a bunch of stories about them, I have no doubt. Join me in welcoming to Booster Pack Throwback. It is the CEO of the former Precedence Entertainment. It is Paul Brown. Paul, how do you do, bud?
I'm great, Rands. How are you?
I'm very, very good. Thank you so much for joining me. And as we were chatting before the mics came on, I did mention that you're part of a very unique group of people, especially in that early era of collectible games, as somebody who was in charge of running a company that's primary product was a collectible game. There is very few people out there who have had that unique experience, and I can't wait to dig into your history.
It's going to be fun. I haven't had a chance to talk about it in a long time, and it was a really, really great time to be in the game industry. So I don't know how we're going to end this podcast because there's so many great stories. So.
Yeah, we'll see how far we get. Okay, so before we jump into sort of the business side of things, the things that you sort of handled that I sort of mentioned in the introduction there, let's get to know you as a gamer. Tell us about sort of what's your gaming origin story? What drew you to the genre of gaming?
Well, I'm a huge gamer geek. I mean, you couldn't be more of a gamer geek than I am. When I grew up, we actually lived overseas, and many times we lived in very remote places in the world. So there was literally nothing to do. There was no television. There was nothing. So I used to, literally collect bottle caps and make bottle cap armies out of those, or just do anything I could to entertain myself. I used to receive a package from my grandparents from the United States maybe once a year, and they would include some of the latest games, and I would lose my mind. So, like, they sent me France 1940 by Avalon Hill, a lot of the Avalon Hill bookcase games, and mind you, Rands, there was no one to play these games with. Okay, so my experience as a young gamer was reading the rules over and over again, and just being like, wow, this is amazing, and maybe get the board out and move some pieces around. So I've been a gamer all my life, and I'll never stop. I love it.
Well, I mean, I can speak to that. Obviously, the people who are listening to the audio version of this won't be able to see it, but those who are watching the video will be able to see that there is a shelf behind you with some of the hottest titles in board gaming at the moment, including games like Root, and a number of others as well. So, obviously, speaking true to that indeed. Now, let's jump forward a little bit, giving a little bit of background on that there. You are a gamer. You're somebody who improvised your own games and then got into the crunchiest side of gaming that existed at the time, Avalon Hill sort of war game, board game type stuff. But I would love to know, specifically to the genre that, this show's all about. Eventually, you are probably going to hear about this genre of collectible games. Tell me about how you first heard about this genre and what your first impressions of it were.
Well, I mean, we were publishing role-playing games. We were publishing card games. I think the first game Precedence ever published was called Slasher: The Final Cut, which was just a real, funny, send off of all the horror movies, you could possibly have. And so we would attend the various game conventions like Gen Con. And I actually remember the year before Magic the Gathering came out, seeing the Wizards of the Coast booth. It was tiny. I'm pretty sure I sat down and talked with Richard Garfield or, several reps from there. And they kind of hinted, hey, we got something in the works. So, we knew something was coming, ahead of time. And then, of course, the advertising started, and for months before it came out, you could see the full page ad in Dragon magazine, so we knew, hey, something's coming. And obviously was there at Gen Con when it was released, and the world changed. Everybody was playing the game. Everybody was talking about the game. You couldn't leave that convention without a sense of the world has changed. The world of gaming has changed utterly. And as soon as we got back to the office, we sat down and said, well, what are we going to do? Because this is a whole new world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely. Obviously, I've had many people share that exact Gen Con 93 story. Basically, you would see people cracking open cards and playing on any flat surface that they could possibly find because all the tables were taken with people playing. It was quite the phenomenon at the time. Now, we did sort of skim over it there, but I would love to capture a little bit of the history of how Precedence started. You mentioned that you guys were publishing role-playing games at that time. So just give me a very brief overview of where that sort of began, how you sort of shepherded Precedence Entertainment into the world of tabletop gaming.
Oh, okay, sure. So actually, most people probably don't know that Precedence Entertainment was actually a subsidiary of another gaming company, and which had been started quite a bit before that, which was called Reality Simulations. I founded that company right out of college, and it was a play-by-mail game company. At that time, there was no internet, so if you wanted to have a multiplayer computer game, you literally had to mail your turns into a central processor who would then input that information into a database and then remail out responses to every player. So I mean, we're talking ancient history, like early multiplayer gaming. And we had, I want to say, the largest company in the world in that space. It's certainly one of the largest. And we were loving it. But what happened, of course, is everybody I knew from all the way back to high school kept coming to me and saying, hey, can you publish one of my games? And when are you going to start getting involved in printed publishing games? And I just kept pushing them off. And until finally, one of my best friends from high school convinced me, said, come on, you've got a good, successful company here. Let's start publishing actual paper and pencil games. And he was the one who brought Slasher: The Final Cut in, and it was inexpensive to make. I finally said, okay, fine, let's do it. Actually, what happened before that is I went to a Gen Con and spent the whole convention pitching other publishers to publish some of these games, and talked to luminaries like Steve Jackson, who, by the way, I'm a huge fan of Steve's. He's a awesome guy. The game industry would never have been the same without him. And when he shared with me the numbers and the economics behind publishing a card game, it blew my mind. I mean, there was no money in it. If you could sell 4,000 or 5,000 copies, you were a superhero. And if I was going to sell him the game design and get 50 cents a copy, there's just no money in it. So I came home from that convention and said, well, I guess we got to publish it ourselves. So that was the beginning. And we published that. And actually, it was successful. I probably sold 5,000 to 10,000 copies of it. And I still love the game. Anyone who doesn't have a copy, try and find it on eBay because it's pretty funny. But then, as you're going to hear as we go through this, the game conventions are so important to the industry. That's where things change. So at another game convention, which was a small local one, I had a guy come up to me and say, hey, I've got a role-playing game I would love you to publish. And of course, you hear this a million times and you're always like, yeah, but let me see your stuff. It blew my mind. I mean, this guy, his name was similar to yours, Rand Ackles. He had been a freelancer for White Wolf. He wrote a supplement for their vampire game called Vampires on Most Wanted or something. And he handed me a folio that literally blew my mind. It was so innovative, so creative. The world was so amazing that I just literally right on the spot said, we're going to publish this.
And what was that game eventually going to be?
That was called Immortal, and it was a role playing that we published, and actually was also very successful. I think we sold, I mean, relatively speaking to our size at the time, I think we sold 10,000 copies of the initial book, and we were quite happy with that. So anyway, at that point, we were off and running. We kept publishing games, and like I say, until Gen Con, when the world changed, and we were like, okay, well, now what are we going to do? Because this is up until that point, you understand that TSR dominated the game industry. They were 100 times bigger than anyone else, and they were the only game in town. So to suddenly have a new force in the industry that was actually making money 100 times more than they were, we were like, okay, well, we got to do something. We got to respond to that, and we actually had a company meeting, which I can tell you about if you'd like.
So let's just pull out a couple of things there. First of all, you mentioned Steve Jackson, and just to drag it back to the sort of the card sort of centric stuff. Steve was telling you about how little money there was in sort of card game publishing, and he would definitely know, because arguably before Magic the Gathering, obviously he had Illuminati, which was probably the like sort of front running card game in the hobby industry, and then later became Illuminati in a collectible sense. He did sort of rework it and sort of add new cards and stuff, and put it in booster packs and stuff. And obviously this new economy, this new sort of blind buy economy, is what infused card games with this ability to be able to make money. So it's awesome to hear that you guys reapproach this. Now, to speak to trading card games though, and obviously, you guys did a company meeting to sort of figure out what you're going to do, and I'm sure you'll tell me about it. But there is sort of the first sort of collectible product that I'm aware Precedence was involved with was not something that you guys published yourself. Sort of almost acted as if a game design studio, and that is the Gridiron football card game, which was the first sports trading card game on the market. Can you tell me a little bit about that and sort of unpack that sort of that question there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was amazing. So actually, that was post. That happened post the Gen Con meeting, I believe, and my recollection is I said to everyone, I had a company-wide meeting. I said, well, I want to hear everyone's ideas about what we could possibly publish. And there was a million different ideas that came out. And I said, okay, look, the Gamma trade show is coming up, which is a very small convention, just limited to retailers and publishers. I said, why don't we do this? Because we don't really know what's going to be the most successful approach. Why don't we just make a concept art piece for all the ideas that we have, and we'll just put them up in our booth, and we'll talk to people in the industry, and we'll see, hey, what gets some traction? Retailers, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Well, one of the ideas that was pitched was, well, what if we do a football game? I mean, sports is huge. Collectibles cards are huge with sports. So wouldn't it be a natural fit to have a collectible sports trading card game? And we're all like, yeah, it would be. So obviously we had no license with the NFL, so we created, we sat down, we created like a world background, and then we hired a guy to do a concept piece. His name was Drew Morrow, as I believe, or Drew, amazing artist, and he drew an initial piece which we made as a poster along with many others. We put those up in the Gamma trade show, and this is a perfect example of how serendipity can change your life. So who walks into the Gamma trade show but a group of representatives from Upper Deck, the largest publisher of collectible trading cards in the United States, or certainly one of the largest, along with Topps. One of their most important and influential executives, a guy named Ernie, walks by the booth, looks and sees the poster and says, I want that. That's what we came to the show for. A week later, I was in the headquarters of Upper Deck, Carlsbad, California, sitting across the table from the chairman and chief executive officer of Upper Deck. He said, this is coming into our space where we're dominant. We need to be a player in this space. We want this game. We want it affiliated with Upper Deck. And we had inked a contract within a week after that.
Wow, like, to speak to that serendipity, that is just amazing. Like, one of those ideas came out. Now, at this point, though, obviously, I would infer from that that Upper Deck was looking to sort of break into this collectible card game market specifically, as they were dominant in sort of like, you know, what you had as like the non-sports cards and sports cards as well, in that sort of space, famously. And obviously at that point, when they saw the poster, did you have a game behind it, or was that all work that came after this contract was inked?
No, no, we didn't. We had nothing. That's what I'm saying. We just had an idea. We had many ideas. I think we had 8 or 10 posters with different ideas. We knew we could design the game. That wasn't a problem. But we didn't know which game to design. So we were letting the public tell us, which they did. Now, I would probably own Planet Earth if things had gone slightly different at that point. But what happened is I said, this really should be adapted to actual professional sports. We should have a true NFL game. We should have a true NBA game or whatever. But Upper Deck was dead set against that. That was going to cannibalize our existing market. And they absolutely insisted that it have to be a fantasy world and a fantasy basis. And it didn't work. It didn't work. The game didn't get the kind of traction that would make a difference in their space, you know. And just to give you a sense of the numbers, I'm pretty sure that the Lion King trading cards generated about $300 million worth of income for Upper Deck. So we're talking, if it's not in the millions, in the tens of millions, it doesn't really matter to Upper Deck. So what would be, you know, and remember the hobby game industry that we all were working in, if you sold 10,000 copies of something and made $100,000, I mean, you're doing pretty good. If you made $1 million on a product, I mean, you're a superstar. I mean, come on, you're a rock star. So, but they're looking at a completely different scale. And I truly believe if they had just taken the ideas of collectible cards, gaming, and applied it to their existing licenses, they would have come to dominate this space. And we would all be calling Upper Deck the #1 player in this space right now. But rightfully so, if you have something and it's successful, you're a little bit fearful to cannibalize it, I believe. So they decided to go a little bit different direction.
So it's so fascinating as well, because obviously they were so dominant in that space, and those numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. But I do think you're right. If they had done something in the more collectible space, you know, I don't think it probably could have gotten to the 300 million. That's sort of numbers that we're only seeing sort of nowadays, or, you know, in the post sort of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh sort of generations and stuff like that. In those early days, who knows what could have come about it, and they might have captured the children's market that those other games I just mentioned sort of did eventually. And it's so interesting as well that that they were so resistant of the idea of cannibalizing their own market as well. It is a fascinating look inside the industry, and obviously they didn't quite understand in the same way that, say, Wizards of the Coast or even hobby gamers did the appeal of what makes a collectible trading card game more interesting. You know, they're like, all right, well, we can sell, you know, several million packs of this just by slapping Simba on a card and putting it in a booster pack. They probably didn't have the understanding of, you know, what goes into crafting a game, crafting, you know, the art, managing a tournament scene, all that sort of stuff as well, and probably wasn't worth their time at that particular instance.
Well, that was the expertise that we were bringing to the table. And but what my understanding at this juncture of my life would be that it's just all about adding value, and each of those components adds value. The license, in their case, added value. The collectability and the ultra rare cards added value. If they had just taken what they had and then added more value, which would be gameplay value, they would have just continued to expand their market. You know, and I haven't followed their companies in recent years, so for all I know, they're doing great and making hundreds of millions of dollars doing it. So, but at that time, what we took away from that was, hey, licensing is a big leg up, and it just kind of eliminates one level of what you have to do. Of course, we love to create new worlds and new characters. Everybody who's in hobby gaming does, but we felt, based on that experience, that okay, so let's focus our efforts on licensed products, because we need a competitive advantage versus Wizards of the Coast, because obviously they're the lead in this field. So let's go. Now, I have to take my hat off, though, to John Zinzer, who made a bolder choice in developing his own IPs and was very successful with it. So, it could, I can look back and say maybe what we made was a more timid choice and ultimately wasn't as good a choice. I don't know. But we did make the choice. Hey, let's use intellectual properties that exist right now as our platform and then just use our skills to add game value.
Awesome. So that dovetails to my next question perfectly. But before we jump into that, obviously, let me set the scene of, like, for people who may not be aware, the industry that, you're sort of coming into once you sort of start launching these licensed products. So again, you mentioned John Zinzer with AEG. They had a modest sort of cult success with Legend of the Five Rings, but obviously Magic is completely dominant, and mostly Wizards of the Coast is focused on that and other gaming licenses, like, we aforementioned Vampire the Masquerade. They did a card game based on that, and obviously Cyberpunk, which they made Netrunner out of, and BattleTech. They were sort of focused on sort of that core hobby market. Meanwhile, you also have a company like Decipher that had sort of stumbled upon the same thing that you had, the understanding that licensing was going to be such a crucial part of sort of exciting people about this collectible card game sort of genre, and they sort of started pursuing sort of the biggest sci-fi licenses, arguably, that you could have in the world, which were Star Wars, Star Trek, and then so on and so forth. But what you guys decided to do is then you guys, there is a couple of years between, sort of what we were talking about with the football game and obviously the launch of your first sort of massive, biggest success, which was Babylon 5. So let's speak to that. Let's jump into that pool a little bit. So tell me a little bit about how the idea for Babylon 5 itself, pursuing Babylon 5 came along, why you felt like that was the right license, and what your experience was when it came to actually, pursuing that license from Warner Brothers.
Sure. So again, we were a small company and we would have company-wide meetings. So, we got everybody in the conference room and we said, okay, we've kind of reached this point where we've decided as a company we're going to go in the licensing direction. So I'd like to hear from everyone. Let's get the whiteboard out and let's write down every single license that we can think of, which one would have the most appeal, and that we also feel a kinship towards, that we feel we can really bring our talents to bear because we love the property. I mean, if you don't like the property, why are you going to work on it? You got to marry your skills with love. So we got the list out and we started going. And then there's another factor was resources. We weren't a huge company, and you have to understand that getting a license is costly. You have to pay an upfront fee, and you also have to be taken seriously, and be of a size to do it. So I don't know a lot about the background for Decipher, but I have a feeling that they had deeper pockets and maybe a larger size company to start with. And so we're able to get a little more traction with some of the larger licenses. We were kind of locked out of those really big licenses. So for example, something that no one would know unless they watch this broadcast is we made a huge effort later on to get the Harry Potter license. I mean, we threw everything but the kitchen sink at getting that license. And I think that our company would be a massive company today if we had succeeded, but we just weren't large enough and we just didn't have the pockets deep enough to get that license. And also, I mean, we had hired a consultant later on who knew a lot about licensing, and he even told us about Pokemon before it came out. Hey, this is huge in Asia. It's going to be big. And we lost that. We were not even in the running, because we were just too small. So with that in mind, we kind of honed it down and we realized that the best shot we had was Babylon 5. First of all, we were all obsessed with Babylon 5. We would go every week. We would gather and watch the shows together. We talked about it incessantly. We loved the show. So we knew that we would be able to bring, that to the property. And second of all, it wasn't a big show. We thought, what, we have a shot here. This is something that we could actually get the license. And sure enough, we did. We talked to Warner Brothers. We had told them we have a whole new category. They had never heard of this category. And so for them it was, okay, great. We can license a new category. So it's fresh money for us. And we made them an offer. They counter offered. We came to an agreement, and off we went. We had the license, and we were thrilled. I mean, probably one of the happiest moments of my life and everyone else I worked with when we got that license, because we loved Babylon 5.
Well, obviously, you spoke to it just there. You've got to create something passionate that you love, and the history of, especially the history of collectible trading card games, is littered with defunct games that were slapped a license on by a company who didn't really mind all that much about the particular license and fell by the wayside. Even Juggernauts, Wizards of the Coast, I'm sure they had some passion for it, but they certainly didn't pursue Hercules and Xena the same way that they pursued something like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering or anything like that in that sort of same contemporary time that we're talking about here. So Babylon 5, you've got the license. It's ready to go. But now you've got to understand there's actually the crafting the game side of things. And one of the most fascinating things, I think, that, if you look at that particular game historically, one of the most interesting things about it is that it's sort of, almost like the vampire game that we sort of mentioned before, it embodied the idea of playing not just a one-on-one game like Magic the Gathering sort of was primarily at the time. It played best as sort of like a group game, almost like a political trading card game where you would sort of have in-game politics amongst your other things, which encapsulates the franchise perfectly. And has become something that's super common nowadays, especially in the Magic the Gathering community. They've sort of crafted this whole new format that's all about sort of cross-play and sort of multiplayer and everything like that. Commander, but tell us why lean in that direction, and where was that inspiration for that element of design?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's pretty exciting. And anyone who's going to be working in this space or elsewhere in gaming, I think this is going to be key information. So, but first of all, I have always only been interested in multiplayer. I mean, for me, gaming is about people sitting around the table and interacting with each other. And that's what I've always loved about it. And in fact, in my earlier phase, when I was working with reality simulations, the reason we had gone play-by-mail version is because I had no interest in man versus computer entertainment. I mean, I remember sitting there playing Zork, one of the first, if not the first computer games, and just going, I don't like this. It's me, and then I want people. I want to deal with people. So again, when we had the chance to do Babylon 5, that was one of our seminal ideas, is how can we make this a group game versus one-on-one? And also, you have to analyze the property that you're dealing with and see what is the key elements that make it tick. And if you don't capture those, you're not doing your job as a game designer. You're not contributing to that universe. Remember, somebody sat down, and in that case, J. Michael Straczynski, who, again, got to take my hat off. He's amazing. I mean, the guy is a genius. And he sat down and created that universe and that world. And if we don't honor that and understand how it ticks and bring that to life in a game format, we haven't done our job. And so this is where we came up with the idea, which I'm still very proud of the hidden agenda. Up until that time, I was not aware of any game ever that I had seen where the victory conditions were different for different players. And listen, if in your life you can do one thing that's truly new and original that has never been done before, you can be happy, because it's very difficult. I mean, the world is filled with very intelligent and creative people, but it could be that we were the first to do that. I'm not sure that I'd seen that before. But we thought that was the linchpin and the key to the Babylon 5 property, that you never knew honestly what each diplomat was trying to achieve. And so we thought, well, that's got to be the key of the game, is that you have a hidden and secret victory condition. And from there, that was the starting point of the design, and just evolved from there.
That's fantastic. Now, let's speak to what we'd already mentioned before, bringing that passion to it. Now, obviously, your passion for Babylon 5 is what, and your peers, was what allowed you to look at the property and understand this is what is important to not just me as a fan, but other fans as well. And you're not servicing a single market. You're not servicing just gamers. You're not just making a great game. You're making a great game that represents a brand like Babylon 5. And how you've captured that was in such an impressive manner. And off the top of my head, I can't think of another game prior to that did have individually different hidden agenda, sort of that sort of thing. I know obviously games like Netrunner had sort of asymmetrical gameplay, but you sort of brought that surprise element of like, aha, this is what I'm trying to do. It also adds a bluffing element, and it's great with the politics as well. And as you said, it fits the theme perfectly. I just because we are already getting a little bit long here, I will move on to something else that was really unique about Babylon 5, and it's a little bit further away from the design side of things. It's something that comes in sort of, it puts, rather than, emphasizing the game in collectible card game, it puts the collectible in it. And something I do think that you guys did uniquely was you guys introduced autograph cards to sort of the game as well, which is not something I believe had happened previously anywhere else in any other sort of collectible trading card game to that point. So talk to me about that inspiration as well, because not only were you connecting the fans with the universe via the rule set and making it feel holistic, you're actually connecting them with the people who make the show as well through those autographs.
Yeah, good point. So obviously collectible card gaming was melding two industries together. It was melding gaming and it was melding collectible cards. Well, we had a leg up because we had a partnership with Upper Deck. And so we lived and breathed their oxygen, and they shared with us, what was the lifeblood of their brand, of their industry. And it was all about bringing people closer to the bringing fans closer to the people they admired, the sports figures. So, and autographs is everything in that industry. So because of that knowledge, I said, well, let's power up. I mean, let's take the strengths of that industry and bring it into the game side. And it just seemed obvious to us, but I think we had a leg up again, having that partnership with Upper Deck. So I started reaching out to the actors involved, and that really was amazing and has enriched my life ever since. I'm still friends with some of the actors on Babylon 5. Claudia Christian is an amazing person. I'm extremely sad about some of the people who have passed from the cast. But we would reach out to them and we'd do a deal. Hey, for X amount, can you do a convention appearance and can you sign X number of cards? And I mean, it was, the fans loved it. I mean, they absolutely loved getting those rare autograph cards. And I think that was a big part of the success of the game.
Absolutely, and you're 100% right. A lot of people who came to that game were fans first. So getting, like you said, that piece of that universe, bringing it into their world through that collectability is absolutely fantastic. Now, my next question does sort of speak to how the game changed and evolved eventually as, things started to go on. But before we get to that, you mentioned conventions and how important they are to the gaming industry. Do you want to just share with me any of your other sort of favorite memories from sort of, shepherding sort of Babylon 5 when it was sort of on its tear up as a trading card game and sort of on its way to sort of, solidifying an audience?
Well, I think that the actors had no idea what they were getting themselves into and were blown away. They were literally blown away. I remember we made a deal with Walter Koenig, who is a wonderful person too, and a friend. And he came out to Gen Con, I believe it was. And we were in a limo. We gave him the star treatment. We limoed him from the airport. And he's just like, Paul, this is blowing my mind. I mean, I'm sitting here at a booth and there's thousands of people wrapped around trying to get to see me and get my autograph. And he was a real special guy because, of course, he had the Star Trek legacy, and then he was also in Babylon 5. So it was super cool. I grew up watching him on TV. I was geeking out. And the same thing with Mira Furlan. She actually we threw a party where we invited pros to come, and she was there at the party, and everyone they were losing their mind to be able to meet her because she was so smart and so beautiful and just such a great actress. But she was blown away too, because she just couldn't believe the fans and how much they loved her. So yeah, it was big. We would have a booth and it would be just lines all through the whole convention. People wanted to get up and talk to Walter. They wanted to get up and talk to Claudia. They wanted to talk to Mira. And so it was a phenomenon. You never saw that at conventions before that. And I don't know, it's been a while since I've been to Gen Con. I don't know if you see that now. But at the time, believe me, fans were going crazy to meet these famous actors.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of that at Gen Con nowadays. You don't see a lot of that sort of like integration of other pop culture. It's very board game centric. I'm sure there's, individual examples when there's giant licensed games and stuff like that. And it's so great that you bring up Walter, because this is the actual second time on this show I've had a great Walter story. A colleague of yours from years back, Steve Domzowski, had his own Walter Koenig story because he worked on the original Star Trek card game as well. So I think like Walter might be the hidden celebrity of 1990s collectible card games that we never really knew we had. That's fantastic. So let me ask you about this then. And it does sort of speak to how Babylon 5 started to change and shift towards the end of its run, because you guys started the show was well underway by the time you had the game come out, and it was also started. It was only 5 seasons. J. Michael Trubisky did an amazing job with those 5 seasons, and then it started to metamorphosize into something else. So with the television version of Babylon 5 sort of ending, but your game sort of continuing, and then it slowly metamorphosizing into something like Crusade, which was like a sequel series or spin-off series or whatnot. It forced you guys to obviously in ways reinvent the game itself. How did you guys as game designers, as a publishing company, tackle this radical change to this brand that you had sort of been locked into for a couple of years at this point?
Well, first let me say that the elephant in the picture here is that the end of Babylon 5, the show, was the end of Precedence, because we were never able to capitalize on that success, and it was a very big success for us, into if we could have gone on and had other products that were equally successful, then we'd still be publishing to this day. But when the show was canceled, that was the beginning of the end for us, because we'd grown to a certain size. We had to have a certain income base to maintain it, and we tried and we tried and we tried, and we just were not able to replicate the success. So you mentioned at the top of the show, we did a Tomb Raider game, not successful. We did a Terminator game, not successful. We did a Wheel of Time game, pretty successful, but not as successful as Babylon 5. We did a Rifts game. We did Aliens versus Predator, and just we couldn't replicate the level of success where the fans were just going crazy and we're selling millions of dollars worth of products. So it's unfortunate, because you would have thought that one of those. And so what I'll say to any game designers out there is treasure your victories, because what I've learned is that if you did 10 projects, you might think 8 of them, these are amazing, they're all going to go. These other 2, I'm not sure. It could be the 10th one that's your biggest success. You never know what the public is going to truly love. You might think but you don't. And so once you do have a success, you have to capitalize on that and continue to capitalize on it. The companies that focus deeply on their core hits are the ones that go big. For example, I know this is going way outside, but I really want designers out there to understand this. Barbie, one of the most successful products in toys, that Mattel, when they got a new CEO at one point, they asked him, well, where are we going to go? What new directions are we going to go? And he says, we're going to do more Barbie. Okay. And he was able to add, I think, $100 million of revenue by expanding that core success. So never go too far afield from your successes, because they're few and far between. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Specifically speaking to sort of the game players have, as sort of Crusade came in, it sort of forced you, in my understanding, to sort of reshape the game in various ways, bringing in new elements and stuff like that Crusade included that maybe Babylon 5 didn't. So let's sort of land on that then. Can you speak to anything that you remember, and I understand that this is 3+ years ago now, as to how the design of Babylon 5, the card game, changed with when you guys pivoted to that Crusade set, which was unfortunately the last set for that game?
I really can't speak to that, because at that point in time, I was managing from 30,000 feet, and I really trusted my designers. And so you would need to bring on John Myler or some of the designers. All I can tell you is that we would sit down every time we did a new set, and we would say, we need a new mechanic. We need to draw forth from the material something that's going to take the game in a new direction. And we would try and pivot off of that. So obviously Crusade is based in a different environment. You're not on Babylon 5 anymore. And so we would have used that, as a pivotal element. But unfortunately, I can't really speak to much more to the design. I was at that point spending most of my time trying to generate licenses, do business deals, and so forth and so on. I would like to talk about the Aliens and Predator game, if you'd be interested to hear about that.
You know what? All of the games you mentioned before, I have questions about. Maybe not as extensively as Babylon 5, but I definitely have those in the pipeline. So we'll cue that up in just a second. So to sort of speak to all of that, do you remember? Can you speak to your memory of hearing that? Because the game did continue for a little bit after sort of Babylon 5 had been cancelled and Crusade came in. But do you remember getting that news that Warner Brothers wasn't going to allow you guys to renew the license? There was going to be that, you were all ready to sign the contracts again, and all of a sudden it was like, no, all merchandise for Babylon 5 is gone. Can you speak to what that experience was like for you as a business owner? And, not to make it sound too melodramatic, but only to repeat what you said, it felt like it might have been the end, looking back in hindsight of Precedence Entertainment.
What I'm going to say now is hearsay, and I don't speak from direct knowledge. So this is what I believe. What I believe happened is that at the highest levels, Warner Brothers was talking to J. Michael Straczynski and saying, we want the show to go in a different direction. We want more intimacy, and we want more combat. We want this to have, more less talking heads. And obviously he had a vision for the show, and no one needed to tell him what to do. The show was amazing and it was perfect. So however we responded to that, the point was, at some point, Babylon, the executives at Warner Brothers were looking for something different. And I think an example would be Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has a lot of graphic sexuality, a lot of graphic combat, and a great story team. So, they were looking at that point more in that direction. For whatever reason, that didn't happen, so the show was canceled. And it happens all the time in Hollywood. A lot of great shows get canceled. So, but we just weren't able. We weren't able to go in a new direction. We couldn't get something else that would work. And we wanted to do Star Wars. We even pitched Looney Tunes. We pitched Warner Brothers on doing a Looney Tunes game. We just were not able to get another license that was as strong. And when that license ended, we had really tied our ship to it. So that was just, what? At that point, you're just kind of managing the down as opposed to managing the ups. So there's no other way to put it. It was the end of us.
Interesting. And it's unfortunate, obviously, looking back on that history, but again, like you said, these decisions get made at a level that is so far removed from what you were doing at that time, obviously, and for reasons that, you had no control on. So let's talk about the cancellation of the game itself, only briefly. And again, as you were managing from such a higher level, and this might be a question for sort of the more sort of crunchier designer types, but I will ask it for the sake of the community. When you guys sort of exited the Babylon 5 license and had to cancel it, you guys were literally, from my understanding, weeks away from shipping a 12-card collector's set, and also deep in the process of creating another expansion, which was Anlashuk, if I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, with like Ranger cards and a new win condition and all that sort of stuff as well. Do you have any memories of anything about those products that you want to share, or how that, how managing, this almost released product after you had to lose the license sort of went for you guys?
Well, there's a base cost of producing a collectible card game at that time. To get the presses running, to turn out one pack, there's a basic cost, and it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So as your sales diminish, there comes a point when, if you can't recover your base cost, then you're just going to lose money. And remember that, and I don't know if the industry still works the same, it was very much a pre-order based industry too. So you announce what you're going to do. The retailers tell the distributors what they want to order, and if you can tell a long time ahead of time, hey, this doesn't look good. We've got 50,000 pre-orders, and we know that to run the presses, it's going to cost 250,000. So, unless something great happens, we're going to lose 200,000. So at some point, as a business director, you've got to say, this doesn't make economic sense. I have to pull the plug. The pre-orders do not justify the expense. And that's what happened. These last products had to be canceled because as the show wasn't airing, fan interest was waning. Retail interest was waning, and there just wasn't enough. There just wasn't enough in the pipeline. So that's a business decision. You gotta make a business decision, and you move on. And closing the company, same thing. It's terrible, but you make a business decision. You sit down with all the employees. You do the best that you can to exit everybody as respectably and honorably as you can, and then you have to close the doors. So, if Babylon 5 had continued, and we believed in the property so much, if it had continued, they made a movie, which I'm sure that there was many talks at Warner Brothers between JMS and Warner Brothers about making a feature film. If they'd done a feature film and gone on, we'd still be publishing. No doubt about it, that we'd still be publishing. But and so fast forward from there, what I learned from the entire experience is that the risk of tying your ship to an IP is that you're dependent on that IP. And so now my work currently starts from the development of the IP up, because if you don't own the IP, ultimately your fate is in the hands of other people. So just be aware of that. Say it's great, you get a leg up. You don't have to do that part. You've already got a fan base, but your fate is also dependent on, those other groups. So some of the properties that have legs and have been around for a very long time are a lot safer. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, these kind of properties are a lot safer because they've had interest for a long time and probably will continue to have interest for a long time.
Well, for sure. And you mentioned it in there, Star Wars, and a contemporary of Precedence was obviously, as we mentioned them before, Decipher, and they eventually ended up losing that Star Wars license as well, and to Hasbro, which also owned Wizards of the Coast at the time, and then they sort of took it on from there. And that sort of obviously, as we spoke about before, you get used to a certain income from that particular license, from that particular game and stuff like that, and things fall by the wayside. What they decided to do is take the lesson that you learned and sort of try and craft their own IP around that rule set. Now, the reason I bring that up is I had found a couple of articles from around the time that, Precedence had to announce that, unfortunately, Babylon 5 had to fall by the wayside. And you were quoted at the time as saying something along the lines of this, that you would be pursuing other IP licenses to which you could maybe graft this Babylon 5 rule set onto. Did you have any success there? Was there anything in particular that you were looking at? Obviously, nothing came of it, but I'm just curious about that history.
Well, as I mentioned, we really went after a lot of licenses. Harry Potter was my number one hope, that I really felt that would actually go to the next level, and we could have competed successfully with the largest companies. Again, I had a very talented design team. They were very, very talented, and no doubt, I'm sure that you don't know how it hurts my soul when I see someone come out with a licensed product and it's just a veneer. They use the images, and it's like, come on, guys. I mean, you didn't bring the property to life. So having the chance to do Harry Potter would have, because it had the same, every person I knew was reading Harry Potter. I was at my lake house. My daughter got a copy sent to her directly. Every other kid got one. They stopped they wouldn't ski. They wouldn't go to the beach. They would do nothing except read Harry Potter. So that was my big hope. And unfortunately, that didn't come to be.
It's interesting because when Harry Potter came out, the collectible game space was sort of in a point of flux. Pokemon had hit and was sort of capturing the kid market. Harry Potter looked like the next sort of big phenomenon in the sort of children's popular culture space. And you're actually the fourth person to tell me that, you're a company pursuing that Harry Potter license. And obviously you guys had a leg up with already having a relationship with Warner Brothers, but unfortunately it was never meant to be.
Yeah. And from the standpoint of a studio, licensing merchandise, it's just an income stream. So they're going to legitimately take on the largest company offering the most money, that shows the competence to do the license properly. So ultimately, all licenses should go to Mattel and Hasbro. They're the biggest companies, with the most expertise and that can pay the most. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they ultimately got, Star Wars. And I'm not sure who has Harry Potter right now, but wouldn't surprise me if they did. So it's a small fish in a big sea, and the collectible space just became a bigger and bigger sea. But so be it. So be it. That's if we had developed our own IP, which we had the talented people to do it, that it would have been interesting to see how that went in a different direction. Although I have to say, in my personal opinion, the best collectible card game ever made, and with the most amazing background, is not published to this day and was not terribly successful. So it's you never know. Bottom line is you never know. Have you had Robin Laws on the show?
I haven't yet. We've communicated, but we haven't actually figured that out just yet. But I mean, I assume you're talking about Shadow Fist?
Yeah, because I had I mean, one of the geeky things about being in the industry is because you're coming in as a fan and a gamer, and now you get to sit with these people and deal with these people, and you're pinching yourself. So I got to play, with John Zinser on the airplane, a demo copy of his game. He was just showing me, with like handmade cards, on an airplane as we're flying a convention. I got to play Shadow Fist with Robin, and a couple of guys in the lobby of some hotel, and in my humble opinion, that was the best pure game design and also the best background and some amazing art too. I loved that game. But it's not published today as far as I know, and it wasn't successful. So it's always a crapshoot.
Yeah, well, it's a game that's much loved, and speaking to the audience, if they're interested in Shadowfist, you can go check it out. There's even like a fan-run company that now has the license for it, and it is actually, publishing Kickstarters and stuff like that. The most recent one wasn't as successful as I think they had hoped, but it is still something that is vibrantly loved by the community. So obviously there was something that was still there, in the same way that Babylon 5 is, but it generated its own IP, which much like Legend of the Five Rings before it as well, speaks to how innovative and creative that particular brand was. So hopefully one day Robin and I will have a chance to talk about that. Now, we did mention before, we mentioned Alien vs. Predator, which was one of the licenses you guys did get, or in some capacity got, because I know that there was another company involved with publishing that game, at least initially. So let's talk about that. After your team designs this Alien versus Predator game, tell me about the process that you had getting that license. Tell me about what you remember about sort of having your team sort of craft that game. Tell me all about sort of the origins of how Alien Predator. I don't even know if it was called Alien versus Predator at that time. Wasn't even out yet at that point. You were just sort of marrying these two 20th Century Fox licenses together, which had been done in comic books before. So tell me all about that.
Oh man, I'm thrilled to talk about that. So as the industry grew, larger and larger companies had interest because they could see that it was a big revenue space. That particular case was HarperCollins coming to the space and saying, how can we get involved? Now they're a publishing company, so they really don't create content. They just publish content, but they had licenses, a lot of licenses, and they were looking for homes for them. So they hired another company to do a Hellraiser game, and so they had several companies working with them, and they came to us and said, we have a license with Fox. We'd really like you to do an Aliens Predator game. And we said, sign us up. We don't have to think even twice about it because, again, we're massive fans. And flew out to California, went to the studio, had an amazing experience talking with the people at Fox. I mean, just, again, pinch me. It is so amazing. I was actually in the studio a lot while they were filming. Gosh, I don't know if it was Aliens 3 or Aliens 4. It was the one with the French director. And I remember a very French production assistant taking me around and seeing all the sets and where they were just filming everything. And she's like, I cannot take you to talk to the director and the writer right now. They are in conference. They are trying to decide the final ending of the movie. And I remember thinking to myself, they're doing $100 million movie and they don't know how it ends. Oh my God.
Some Alien fans would argue that makes a lot of sense if they've seen Alien Resurrection.
Yeah, so they weren't sure how it was going to end, but anyway, I learned a lot from Fox because I remember talking to the executive there in charge of licensing, and she said, "Listen, what we've learned is when you have a couple of properties, if you meld them together, sometimes you get something even more amazing. And so they had the memory, the institutional memory of doing Frankenstein versus Dracula. And this is before your time, before my time, but when that happened, it was huge for 20th Century Fox. And so they were like, we're going to do that again. We're going to put out, eventually we're going to do an Alien versus Predator. And again, proud moment. So we actually got to lead the charge a little bit because we made a game based on that idea before the movie even came out, as you said. And so, believe it or not, again, this is my belief. I could be wrong. I think we invented the idea of the Pred-Alien because it had never been talked about, never had been filmed, nothing like that had ever happened. But when we were designing the game, it suddenly became obvious. Well, wait a minute. What happens if an alien impregnates a predator? You're going to get something really badass. So that little bit of a proud moment because I think we came up with that. But again, you come to the property in a design standpoint, you say, what is special about this property? What makes it tick? And how can we bring that, to the collectible card space? And so we came up with a very unique mechanic. If those are familiar with the game, I thought it was cool. I thought it was very unique. And but you know what? The game wasn't very successful. It didn't take off. So that's what I keep harping to is as a designer, you bring your best love to it. You do everything. You might have the right license. You might have the right mechanics. But maybe at that time, people are just not interested in aliens. That wasn't a high tide for that property. And so it just didn't really take off. But I actually was quite proud of the game. And if you haven't played it, find it in the bargain bin somewhere and give it a try. It's pretty cool.
Well, I want to speak to that because there's a couple of things I want to pull out there as far as lessons that permeate to the game itself. So something, you obviously mentioned, the mixing of those two properties. And what the Alien Predator game did is it really sort of, I think you guys had decided to brand it as the battleground game system. So essentially it was a game system that could ultimately, further down the track, which, again, we'll probably get to Terminator later, could incorporate other IPs, not just that Alien versus Predator IP, and be compatible. And the other thing that it also did is, sort of to speak back to where we were talking before about Hidden Agenda, it also, whatever faction you were playing had its own sort of win condition as well. So there was that asymmetrical gameplay, allowing you to sort of create, that vibrance that you have with the IP while being able to interact with other things. You took Alien, you took Predator, you took, in the other faction, I think in the initial one was the Marines or whatever they were called, like the human characters, and they all had their own particular instance. So tell me about, was that crucial to the design of the way you guys wanted to approach the Alien Predator game, and then which later would sort of also scoop the Terminator game you guys did later into it?
Yeah, absolutely. We used to have a motto that you can't lose money with a fighting game. If people are beating each other up, it's interesting and it's fun. And the legacy lives on. Who doesn't love Smash Brothers? And so we had that same concept, which is let's have a plug and play game system where you can bring any character and give them their particular victory and their particular assets and talents in a fight, and let's pit them all together. And we hoped that it'd be as crazy as Smash Brothers. We wanted to see Daffy Duck going up against Predator. We wanted to see Sonic the Hedgehog fighting against the alien. Because it would be so cool. In fact, I light up even thinking about it right now. How cool it would be to come to a gaming session, sit down with 5 other people and not even know who you're going to be fighting, and suddenly someone, whips out their Green Lantern deck, and you're like, oh, shoot, I'm going to have some trouble, but I've got Jigglypuff.
It's fantastic, and some game companies have found moderate success with that. There's originally Sabretooth, then Jasco, now POW have had the universes system, which is very much taking inspiration from the idea we're talking about here, but it didn't come along for another 10 years to sort of even get any traction then. And, brought in Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, but obviously, your idea was so so driven in the essence, and I think if it had come out at a different time, perhaps if Alien Resurrection had been received differently, if there was a Predator movie in the works or something like that, that IP could have get swapped up with it. But I really do respect the innovation that you guys brought to bringing that game design to life. And I think that it was a really innovative game. And, to speak what you said before, if you can find it in a bargain bin, although I think some of them are expensive now, but definitely give it a go. I tried it a couple of times, and it is a really cool game. I like it a lot, and I do appreciate the work.
I might leave this session and go back to the table, and you suddenly got me thinking. Yes. I just need to find I need to find a good license out there and just have people beating each other up again with cards. It never goes out of style.
Absolutely not. Well, everybody likes a good conflict game indeed. So I probably would leave this question to somebody maybe who was a little bit closer to the ground as far as the design goes. I was going to ask about playtesting it and stuff like that. But what I might do then is I might ask a little bit about it. You mentioned HarperCollins. Eventually, HarperCollins sort of moves away and you guys take over that game altogether. Was there a specific reason for that, or any light you can shed on sort of what happened to, I guess at the time it was called Harper Prism, which, you mentioned that they did do a Clive Barker game as well, and we're managing this, Alien Predator thing. Do you want to just speak to your relationship there and sort of what ended up happening and why you guys had to take over as the publisher?
I'm not really sure what happened, because unlike the case with Upper Deck where I was able to go and speak with top management, in this case I dealt with intermediaries, and so I wasn't aware of what was going on at the higher corporate levels. But I'm just going to say it was probably the same as happened over and over again, whereas if it's just not generating enough revenue to matter for a big company, so and even if you talk to a publisher today, at HarperCollins or Simon and Schuster, they'll tell you, we can put out 100 books and 90 of them are going to lose money, and the 10 that make money, we didn't even think they were going to. It was just we shocked to find out that this particular book sold 1 million copies, so it's a crapshoot with everybody in the entertainment industry. And so, you take your chances and you move on. So I just think that HarperCollins probably entered the space, threw their dice, said, well, so we made a couple $1 million. It's really no big deal. We're not going to renew the license because the costs and fees associated with it are just not enough for us. So that would be my guess.
Okay, cool. All right. And the other thing, just to speak to licensing there, and I could be incorrect about this, but in my memory, the Predator game didn't feature any Arnold Schwarzenegger featured on any of the cards. Can you speak to anything about why that was a crucial part of the Predator franchise that was removed from the game?
Yeah, no, that's a big point. When there's a whole specialty. Licensing is an art to itself, and there's a lot of business knowledge you have to have, and the rights to people's images are individualized and individually negotiated and so forth. Well, so Arnold Schwarzenegger as A+ list actor, has a lot of rights reserved to himself. A lot of he just has tremendous authority over how his images are used, rightfully so. He's a huge star. So Fox made the decision based on other projects that they were doing that it would be just too difficult because you have a publishing schedule. So let's say that you've committed that you're going to have this game come out in August. Well, you send an image to Arnold Schwarzenegger for his review and approval, and let's say that he's making a movie in Jamaica at the time and he just doesn't have time to look at it. Well, you may not get that approval, and therefore you can't publish your game. So it's just, there's some risks associated with it, and they just decided we're going to just have to pursue this without using his image because we don't own the rights. He would have to approve it. So, and again, I think that really hurt the game. I mean, if we'd had those rights, and maybe we should have approached directly and offered to compensate directly, but there may have been something we could do. But without him, I think he was the heart and soul of the Predator property.
Yeah, no, it's a shame to hear. And obviously, like I said, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the irony of bringing out the Terminator game subsequent to that, which was full of his imagery, and especially considering it was uh, somewhat compatible with that particular game system, is just too much irony going on there. So what I will do is I will leave my line of questioning about Alien Predator aside there for a second, and let's talk to the next big IP that you guys grabbed, which was all the rage at the end of the '90s, and ramping up towards a feature film, and that's Tomb Raider. So, I mentioned in the introduction, you guys did do something about Tomb Raider. Tell us about how you guys approached that. Another incredibly innovative game design. But tell me about sort of like why that property appealed to you personally as a business leader, and ultimately decided to run with it as a collectible card game.
Well, like everyone else at the time, I was really enamored with Tomb Raider. I thought it was amazing, and we all loved Lara Croft. And so, as I keep mentioning, things happen at game conventions. Well, in this case, I went to the IEEE conference, Interactive Electronic Entertainment, which was a huge show at the time. Managed to somehow get a meeting with the powers that be, at Tomb Raider headquarters, and they were super cool, very cool about it. They're just like, oh wow, that's cool. You guys want to make a card game based on it? Yeah, let's do it, And the challenge there was actually creating the content, because all the imagery was something that we had to frame grab out of the video game itself. So it became a massive technical challenge to grab frames, process the images so that it was high enough resolution to publish. And I had a whole team of 3 people. I want to say, I got to give my hat off to George Gifford, a dear friend of mine, is very video knowledgeable, and he came in with his team, and they just worked for endless hours to grab those images. And and again, we tried to be as innovative as we could. Every time that we came to a project, we said, let's be as innovative as possible. I absolutely hate people who copy, and people make a lot of money saying, oh wow, that was that Doom game was really successful, let's make another first person shooter. People make a lot of money doing it. We had no interest in that. We always wanted to innovate. So we tried to come up with a game mechanic that we thought really reflected something unique and new, and we put the game out. But again, it just wasn't successful. It's like, what can you do? It was like, you have to have a certain you have to be able to generate $200,000-$300,000 worth of income on these games at the time, based on the publishing model, for it to be something where you could continue doing it. And I think also, we haven't really talked about this, we were starting to enter the era of backlash, and I think actually that may have played more into this than anything else. Poor gamer, is gone from spending a couple $100s a year on his gaming hobby to spending a couple $1,000s a year on his gaming hobby. And I think people were just getting tapped out. I mean, and if you lived through that era, and I don't know if it's still that way, people were they were getting militantly mad about collectibles, and I think we're just facing a headwind where people are like, really, you're going to put out another collectible card game? I'm not buying it. Okay, go F yourself, and so, so no matter how innovative and how great the property, I think that we were just in that time frame where Tomb Raiders and Alien Predators and Terminators just weren't going to succeed, because people they were invested in Magic, they were invested in Pokemon, and they just weren't going to invest in another game, period. That was it.
Yeah, no, it's totally interesting to wallet fatigue is still a big conversation in the collectible game space right now, and probably any sort of hobby space or entertainment space. I'm no doubt at all. What I do want to pull out there, and it's from a little while back, I do want to quickly ask a question. Are you implying, when you were talking about getting the screen grabs for Tomb Raider, that somebody was physically having to play the game until you got to the exact right screen that you wanted, capture that screen, and then eventually have it on that piece of cardboard?
Yes, I am. I mean, it was extremely labor intensive. I mean, we're talking like sewing machine factory in Vietnam. I mean, people sleeping under their desks. I mean, it was unbelievably labor intensive. And but we would have a description, and we'd say, we need a picture of Lara Croft swimming through a cave. We need a picture of a knife. We need a picture of this. And they would have to play the game up until that point and then grab that frame. So
That's absolutely wild. I mean, at first it doesn't sound like a bad day at the office, but when, sleeping bags and everything gets involved, you have to, get yourself into this situation. I can imagine it's almost like being a bug tester for like one of those games or something like that. You've got to try every single little example. It's a really fascinating and unique experience. I know there's a couple other video games that had screen grabs and stuff, but I've never heard that before.
Yeah. No, the actual production requirements these games was pretty intense. I mean, getting images for Babylon 5. I mean, you'd have to get the master, copies from Net or Digital and go through and individually select frame. I mean, the technical work behind it was really tough. And hats off to Decipher. I'm sure that their requirements, were even more so because the quality standards, with Lucas, are huge. So they probably had to just, I can't believe the effort they must have gone into for every image that they actually published.
Yeah, well, I know for their early Star Wars stuff, they'd get like the actual 35 millimeter frame and run it through a machine, and then have to stamp out the exact frame, and then that becomes the negative that then becomes the thing, and then they'd have to digitally touch it up. It was again, much like you guys, much like you just mentioned, it's incredibly labor intensive to sort of do these screen captures in that era. I'm sure it's a lot more streamlined now to be as polite as possible, and the assets are basically generally available on some cloud drive or something like that.
Oh, okay. So we just got to tell your audience, okay, again, you don't realize how much technology has changed. To publish these games at that time, there was no way to even send the data to the printer. I had to physically remove the hard drive from our computer, okay, take it and reinstall that hard drive in someone else's computer at the publisher because the data was huge. You couldn't possibly transmit it. So, here in Canada, our printer was in Canada. It was Quebecor, Montreal. And we would literally fly to Montreal with like a padded suitcase with, the hard drive in there. And if, something happened to that suitcase, that expansion's not coming out.
Just hope that X-ray machine doesn't mess with it or whatever through customs. That would be a nightmarish trip indeed. So let's. I will mention it here. We don't need to go into it because it's a game design thing. But one of the things I loved about Tomb Raider as well is it also offered something really unique. And this has come up, a couple of times. Obviously Precedence's games were really revolutionary, whether that's autograph cards, multiplayer, in Tomb Raider's sense as well. Not only did you have sort of a location-based sort of board state that you would create, it was also a game that by its very nature could offer a version of solo collectible card gameplay, which was almost non-existent at that time, and it's really, really fascinating that's a conversation topic that's really only coming around back now. So again, like I said, great work you guys are doing, and very, very ahead of your time, for better or worse, unfortunately. But the last question I'll have about Tomb Raider, though, is you're on a clip that's basically, Tomb Raider's a huge property, and you're moving towards, you obviously had the game rights, and they're moving towards a time when this Angelina Jolie movie that came out, which was a relatively large blockbuster. Was it ever in your crosshairs to try and incorporate that side of the property into what Precedence was doing?
Well, yeah. I mean, we would have loved to have done that, and huge fan of Angelina Jolie, and would have loved to do it, but just didn't have enough traction with there was just this great sucking sound in the industry, absorbing all the cash. Now that we're talking, I honestly think that was the number one thing that happened, because it even happened at the retailer and the distributor level. A retailer would say, I only have so many thousands of dollars in my bank account. I'm just going to have to pre-order Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, and there's just no money left, and so there just wasn't any money left to it's kind of like how in other categories of products, people just get crowded out of the store. You may have a great can of peanuts, but Planters has got that shelf space and they just can't fit you in. So there was just not enough money in the industry at that time. We would have had to bring in completely new fans, which we kept trying to do. We brought in new, like you mentioned before, people who were fans of Babylon 5, the TV show, would now enter gaming. People who were into maybe Tomb Raider computer game would try it. So we were bringing in new fans, but we would have had to tap into a whole new retailer network almost. And that was another area that we started to explore, was there completely different retailer and distribution channels that we could try to do. We actually came out with a railroad game, which was not a collectible game, and so it doesn't really fit into this conversation, but as an attempt to see if the whole hobby channel could be accessed, because there's tons of hobby stores that sell railroad modeling equipment and all these things. And we thought, well, that's an untapped network. Maybe we can try that. We sold 4,000 or 5,000 copies of a railroad game, but ultimately the channel was turned to Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, and that's all there was, and then there was Star Wars that was also doing well, and Rock Entertainment, their Five Rings, it was a player, it was doing well. So the space became more and more competitive at the long and the short of it, and ultimately I found seems like almost every industry kind of boils down to 3 players at the end of the day. And there's room in there for maybe 2 or 3 very significant players. And no matter how good you are or how great your product is, if you don't have that mass, you may not succeed.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you say that, especially, I mean, obviously it's something I'm very aware of, but in the context right now, where, I don't at the moment, independent trading card games are going through a huge sort of boom, and I think there's a lot of stars in eyes thinking that, they can all compete. But the industry, despite the fact it's grown so much over the last 20 years, is only so big, and like you said, there's always going to be that sort of that 3-channel distribution model, whereas, if a retailer has to spend more money on Magic, which is releasing more products than ever nowadays, and then the other money on Pokemon, and then the last of their money on Yu-Gi-Oh!, it makes it very difficult for those games to get in there. Fortunately, B2C business models, business to customer, is so much more accessible nowadays. So if somebody loves something, in the same way, we spoke to Shadow Fist, that you can buy that directly from the company. And it's really interesting, but I think that's a lesson that, sometimes you have to learn to know. And I think if, there are people watching this who are looking to explore their own collectible game, obviously keep something like this in mind, because even with giant licenses like the ones we've talked about, it still becomes that viable sort of, that push and pull of shelf space and fan attention. Not only is it wallet fatigue, it's also attention fatigue as well. So let's just chuck on forward here. We talked about Tomb Raider, but also you guys were busy in that sort of that late 90s, very early 2000s period, because also you hit the ground as well with a completely different demographic, and that is Wheel of Time. You brought a book series to life with original art, with bringing these characters to life in a way that they'd never been, realized before. Previously they were just pages in, chapters and pages in the Robert Jordan books, but obviously you guys bring it to the table. Tell me about, just very quickly, like what was your decision to pursue that, and what little lessons did you sort of take away from that game?
So that actually was our most successful product besides Babylon 5. It was very successful, and with a couple of more elements to the property operating at the same time, I think we'd still be publishing it today. For example, if the licensor was putting out a TV show like they're doing now, conditions would have been different. We got involved in that because our chief game designer, John Myler, actually was a massive fan of Wheel, and we used to make fun of him, because he was such a Wheel of Time geek that it was ridiculous. And none of the rest of us, all the rest of us were like, okay, another 1,000-page novel from Robert Jordan, and listen, hats off to him. He's an amazing creative force, but the size of the books and the amount, John Myler was the guy. And so kind of as a reward to him, because he worked so hard developing all these products, if I said, okay, John, you get to do what I know you want to do. You don't have to say it. I know you want to do Wheel of Time. He's like, yes, I do. So that was his baby, and he loved it, and he did a fantastic job, and it was very successful, because again, it had a large, true fan base, of readers, and they were really interested in it. I think that game was a little bit cumbersome, it's hard to gauge sometimes when you're developing these games just how long the game is going to play, and that game can get lengthy and can get a little cumbersome. So that was a little bit of a detriment, but still, it was pretty successful. And I just wish the property itself had a little bit more going on ancillary to it, and I think it would have really taken off.
Let's speak to two things there. First of all, yeah, you're right. It had that ingrained base that was not used to seeing merchandise. If you were a Star Wars fan, you would see, a Star Wars board game. You would see, Star Wars greeting cards, all sorts of stuff back then. But Wheel of Time, especially because you guys were creating original art for it, bringing the property to life, it was something that I think really captured the fans, regardless of whether they were gamers, which there is a lot of crossover between those two. To speak to John, obviously, but also just fiction fans were like, oh, I can finally engage with this thing I love in a different way and sort of bring it to life. And I understand, even with the limited turns that you had built into the game, and there was the unique dice that you had to have to play it. It was a somewhat cumbersome game, but at the same time, I think people enjoyed the ability to be able to engage with this property in a different way. So that almost brings us to our last game. Obviously, we can, unless you want to talk specifically anything to the Terminator game, I don't think there's too much I want to cover there, but if there's something that you have in mind.
No,
not really. Yeah, so it used the same rule set as Alien Predator and stuff like that, and it was another licensed game.
Like you said, it was really a plug into the combat system that we use in Alien versus Predator, and we'd have liked to continue to do more plugins and ultimately have dozens of different characters that you could fight each other, but again, no one was really interested in the Terminator collectible game, so there was no point in doing more.
So it didn't really work out that way. So on the horizon, though, is something that's a little bit different for you guys, and actually operating an entirely new sort of pop culture space. So far we talked about novels that you've adapted, we've talked about video games, we've talked about movies, we've talked about television, and finally, to circle back to sort of where Wizards of the Coast started when they started making additional games, you guys jumped into the role-playing game space, which is, as we talked about very at the beginning, you guys sort of started there, not necessarily with publishing your own role-playing game, but licensing from Palladium, off the top of my head, I can't quite remember, licensing their Rifts game and sort of wanting to bring out a trading card game in concert to that. So it is your final collectible game release for the company, and I think maybe even final product line as Precedence was going on. Tell me about what your inspiration for entering this space was and sort of how that came about.
So again, big picture was Babylon 5 is canceled. We know we've got to do something. We've got to find something else that's going to replace that as a product. So we're trying all these different things and we're not getting hits. We can't get that license. This product, even though we thought it would go, didn't go big. So finally we throw up our hands like, maybe we just go back to the heartland. We just go back to the origins. Okay, gamers started this, role-playing gamers. It's all about Gen Con and those guys. Who is in that space that is beloved, that is worthy, that is just fantastic? And we just were like, whoa, riffs. I mean, hey, of course we long ago had thought about Vampire the Masquerade, but they wanted to do their own game, and they did. So we were looking for a partner that was strong in the role-playing space, that didn't have any plans to do a card game. And Kevin Simbita, it was book after book. He'd been doing it for years. It was his passion, and Rifts by its very nature is plug and play. We enjoyed that idea, as we've talked about with the Aliens versus Predators. So we really liked the idea that it would be endlessly expandable, and the factions, if you've never read Rifts, it'll blow your mind. I mean, there's so many different factions and groups and backgrounds, and it's a mind-boggling property, and I don't understand why there is not a Rifts movie, and I don't understand why there's not a Rifts TV show. And I'm going to send this blessing out to the universe that there will be, and that Kevin will be remembered for the amazing creative talent that he is, because that property deserves everything. It deserves a motion picture. It deserves everything. So I'm sending that out to the universe, and I hope that happens. So we wanted to be involved, and we were able to negotiate the license, and off we go. Now, the other factor there was we had developed an increasingly strong stable of design people, and we had David Hewitt, we had Kevin Tewart, and all of these guys went on, by the way, to be very successful in the collectible card game industry after Precedence failed, and worked for, Kevin Tewart, who is the designer of the Rifts collectible card game, is the property manager for Yu-Gi-Oh. I mean, he's in the industry right now, and you should have him on the show. He's an amazingly talented guy. So, and be happy to give you his contact. So, but what happened is because we'd had so many disappointments, is I was like, okay, we're gonna roll the dice here. We're gonna try a completely new approach. We're gonna get the Rifts license, and then I'm gonna give it to a completely new designer, and he's gonna have carte blanche. So I said, Kevin, blank sheet of paper, you do whatever you want, save the company. I mean, make it happen. And and again, he's a brilliant guy. He's very creative, and he came up with his idea was, let's keep it as simple as possible, as basic as possible, fast and furious gameplay. Someone had come up with the mechanic, and I'd have to think for a minute, who was the innovator that first came up with it, of the idea of using the cards themselves essentially as hit points, and you could burn cards. Did that first come out in the Xena Hercules game from Wizards of the Coast?
That was an element of it, but I think Star Wars sort of takes the sort of the earliest one there, like the force, the card, the depleting deck was your life essentially.
Yeah, and so Kevin thought that was cool. He wanted to use that as a core mechanic, and so he went to work. We put our best graphic designers on it. We came with absolutely beautiful packaging. If you've ever seen the product, it's got a book format, so you look like you're buying a role playing game. You got your double decks in there. Really, really, really proud of the game. Not successful. So yeah, so that was our last throw of the dice, and again, I think there's just gamer burnout, and there wasn't enough pure Rifts role-playing game fans willing to shell out the kind of it takes to sustain a collectible card game. And so we had to bow out, turn the merchandise over to Palladium, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, it's a shame to hear that. Obviously, there was big plans and some great innovation, but obviously, just getting that traction again was a bit of a bear to sort of find. And we spoke to the publishing companies before, whether that's HarperCollins or whether that's Penguin Random House or whatever. They will print 90 books, in the hope that 10 go really well, and you guys obviously hit that clip early on, and just didn't get to that second sort of super hit that you were sort of looking for, outside of Wheel of Time, which did pretty well by the sounds of it. There is one thing I want to talk to you about Rifts though, that sort of it caused a day's worth of controversy and stuff like that, and it is really unique, and I think that's something that you could speak to, just for potential designers out there, or just as a cautionary tale. I did read somewhere that Rifts did get in, well, not Rifts so much itself, but Precedence started selling individual single cards on their own website at one point for Rifts. Do you have any recollection of this? And then retailers sort of really took exception to that move.
That's interesting. I wonder, did we do that as a company, or did some of our employees start to do that on the side?
I can only tell you what the news article said. So it sounded like it was through your website directly, selling rares as X amount, and obviously because of the randomization business model, it was something that that retailers who had bought the product took exception to, because they're like, well, if people can just buy it from a direct source, why would they buy randomized packs?
Yeah, so obviously that's been an industry trend that's been developing for a long time and still evolving, where can the publisher have the right to sell directly to the public? And you have to be very careful with that. I think we experimented with that to a slight degree, and there was backlash. So we did something kind of funny and interesting to us, which maybe people do or don't know about, which is when we would publish a game, we would actually publish secret cards that weren't included in the game. So, for example, when we published Babylon 5, we had a card called Surprise, which was never published. It was just a card that we printed. And it was a joke, because if someone challenged us to play a game of Babylon 5 as one of the designers, this was an uber powerful card, like I win the game sort of card, and people would laugh about it, because you're playing the game and suddenly I play a card that's never been published and I win, ha ha ha. So So we always had a few cards like that in every set that we made, and I'm sure we had a few of those for Rifts as well. But it's been a long time, so I don't recall the details. Other than, yeah, as we were struggling to find a way to survive, we were looking at new ways of trying to merchandise our products and try and make some money. So, but that didn't work either. So those who are watching, and the lesson learned is you're going to have 90% for failure, 90% failure rate, and a 10% success rate. So capitalize on your successes because they're going to be hard won.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said right at the beginning, the companies that focus on their, their core products and their best things are going to be the ones that sort of make it, because that's their bread and butter is what they kind of keep sacred. So that sort of brings us to the end, with Rifts falling away, Precedence has to shutter its doors. I mean, I have to ask, obviously, what do you remember of, making that decision, that business decision to actually have to close down this company that you had, essentially, if we go back as far as, Slasher or whatnot, had been working with for 8-9 years plus at that point. Tell me about, what that impact was on you and how that felt delivering that news.
So it was horrible because it was more of a family than anything else. I mean, you got to understand that when you have this kind of small company, you eat together, you game together, you watch TV together. I mean, you might as well be a family, So it was really horrible. And some people took it well, and some people didn't take it well. There's some bitter feelings out there to this day. I'm sure, that there you could put people on the show that say, yeah, that Paul Brown, beep, 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 he ruined my life. So, it's very hard. And, but if there's no money in the bank account, you have to face it. And so we interviewed each person. We did our best to settle our debts, and, we just had to call it quits as of a certain day. And, but what I am proud of, even someone who might come on and say, Paul Brown, beep, 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 every single person that wanted to go on in that industry went on and did very, very well for themselves. So the experience, because we would bring in people that had passion and no experience. Okay. I mean, people would write me and say, I've designed 10 cards for Babylon 5. I'm just graduated high school, and I would really love to come to work for Precedence. Please evaluate these submissions. And we would hire people, like, this guy has got a passion for it and he's got some really cool card ideas. Let's interview him. So, people literally cut their teeth, in the game industry working for Precedence, and went on to do extremely well and manage brands. Dave went to work for Upper Deck managing brands, Kevin went to work, managing Yu-Gi-Oh! And everybody went on and did well. So I'm proud of that, and I'm very happy that happened. What I personally took away from it was you got to control your own destiny, and you have to own the IP. That was the lesson that I took away from it. And after I left Precedence, it was very depressed, and I actually spent 3 years just pretty much staying at home and doing nothing but writing and designing IPs. And that's my thrust to this day, is to build build intellectual properties from the ground up. So put a plug in for myself. If you go on Webtoons, you'll see Lunch Champions, which is my webcomic IP that I've been working on for the last several years. And I hope to evolve that into everything: games, merchandise. You got to build from the ground up with a story and the characters. And if you do that with love and with passion, and they're good, then the sky's the limit, and no one can pull the rug out from under you because you own those properties.
That's awesome. Well, everybody listening out there as well, be sure to check the description or the show notes. Obviously, that Webtoons will be linked in the description as well. And just to speak to what you just said there, it's interesting because I'm hearing this story come full circle. You're sort of talking about creating your own IP at the moment, and that's a thrust and drive that you've had since you left the industry all those years ago. But that's also where you started way back when with that, that Gridiron game that we started talking about at the beginning of the show. It's sort of come full circle. You went through the big IP roundabout and come back to creating that core passion of your own and sort of bringing it to the world. So it's really, really fascinating to see that come full circle in the way that it did. The other thing I will mention as well is you spoke about how many people had sort of used Precedence as a game industry university, sort of went out from, your stable after, everything, that we just talked about happened, and sort of went out to the game industry. So while the company itself doesn't live on, obviously, not only does its legacy of the games that people can still play live on, but also the experience that was gained in those walls still lives on and permeates and impacts the industry as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's history in the making, and you play your small part in it. And I came to it, as I said, as a small child, loving the game industry. I can still remember the awe of walking into a game store and buying the very first copy of Dungeons and Dragons. Before it was even advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I bought the white box. And literally sitting at home and reading the rules and rereading it and not getting it. I mean, the first time you're exposed to a role-playing game, and all you've played is board games or miniatures games, you're just like, I don't understand this. What? So having participated and seeing it, evolve and continue forward, and on it goes. I mean, it's great. And everyone who participated in the company got a lot out of it. I think the fans got out a lot out of it. And people tell me, and I don't even know if this is true, that to this day, Babylon 5 is like the most popular collectible card game in some countries, specifically in Northern Europe. I can't remember if it's Denmark, Finland, Sweden, but it's certainly among the most popular, mostly played games in some places in the world. So I'm like, wow, that's awesome, and actually from time to time, people approach me and say, we'd like to license the mechanic and relaunch the game. But so far over the years, there's never a deal has been struck that made sense. But who knows? Maybe someday someone will resurrect the mechanics and marry it with another property, maybe their own intellectual property, and the game will go forward. So I'm open to that. Let's see what the future holds.
Absolutely, and it still has such a vibrant fan community. It's not it's not the biggest community, but at the same time, it's a very vibrant, very active fan community. I see posts on their Facebook group, which again, if you're listening and you're not in that group, I will link it in the description. And obviously, every single day, people are still discussing the game, still wanting it. I'm sure there are people, I haven't really looked too deep into it, but people who are making custom cards or new fantasy cards, and I'm sure that's going to continue with the new series that I think that they're planning on doing, or the revival, or whatever it is that JMS is sort of working on or talking about working on or whatnot. So yeah, it's absolute great legacy. Not only that, there's obviously people who also love those other games that Precedence had a chance to make, collectible or otherwise. I'm sure Slash has got its fans. I'm sure the Railway game still has people who have it on their shelf and play it often. So yeah, like you said, everything's history in the making. You make an impact on the industry, and everything comes through. Now, before we get out of here, there's two other things we need to do. First of all, I do have some community questions from some of that Babylon 5 community, but other people as well, if you're happy to field those.
Of course, yeah.
Excellent. So I'm going to throw those at you. Like I said, these are from people who are listening to the show or, follow me on social media or whatnot. So the first question actually comes from a previous guest on this show, previous Decipher worker, and I think he was asking on behalf of another guest on this show. But real cool guy, Jason Winter, used to be a designer for Decipher, and later a couple other trading card game companies. But he does want to ask, and you may not know the answer to this, again, you weren't on the design teams or anything like that, but there is something about the Tomb Raider card game that has always been a bit of a bee in his bonnet. And that wants to be, can you speak to the Tomb Raider card karmic balance in its design? It instructs you to roll a dice the next time your opponent is required to, and you roll the dice instead. Do you have any insight into the inspiration for this ability? So as a designer, he's interested in the fact that taking the agency away from one player to roll a random number and giving it to another to roll a random number just seemed like an interesting card idea for him.
I'm going to have to credit John Myler with that one. He came up with that mechanic. But we would sit around and have brainstorming sessions, and I want to talk a little bit about the creative process itself. So the way the human brain works is when you're trying to create something, the very first thing that you come up with is going to almost always be based on something you've seen before. Okay. And the lazy design is to just use that. Okay. So what you've got to do is reanalyze and kind of remember or think, where did that idea come from? And then oftentimes you want to reverse it or think, how can I change it? And suddenly that's when you get into new territory and you get new creativity. Well, it's hard to do that yourself sometimes. So that's why brainstorming is very important if you sit around and talk with other people, because they will be able to throw in the twists and the inflections to your idea. And suddenly you get into new territory. So, and it happens so fast that it's not going to stay with you in terms of your memory. So, but I do know we would sit down and have brainstorming sessions and we'd say, okay, new cards for Tomb Raider, go, and we would just start spitballing and we would throw out ideas. And so yeah, it was just in the moment that someone thought of that idea of like, yeah, I'll just take the dice and I'll roll it for you. How's that?
And trading card games, as I'm sure Jason well knows himself, and the audience may not think about it this way, but they're very hungry beasts. When you have hundreds of cards per set, there's a lot of text that you've got to put on cards and make them feel, functionally unique and individual and stuff like that. So it stands out as a unique and fun, quirky little thing to point to. In the grand scope of CCG history, like, look at what this one does. This one makes me roll the dice instead of you.
Wow. Okay, that was a geek question, Jason. Thank you. I'll try and talk to John. I'll talk to John and I'll see if he can remember the exact moment, and I will try and email you or Facebook message you a personal answer. But thank you for that question.
More than welcome. So the next one comes from a little bit more of the fan community. And this may not be, again, as you are managing from a little bit higher above, you may not have a good answer for this, and that's okay for any of these questions. These are coming from the player base and stuff like that, and that's absolutely fine. So Gregory Stewart Pettigrew wants to know how, knowing, how the game developed or anything like that, is there any rules tweaks that you would have made to make it smoother during Premiere or anything like that, or is there anything that you would want to change about Babylon 5's rule system itself, deliberately push the game in a different direction. The game, like you said earlier, you constantly were adding mechanics and the game was constantly evolving. Is there anything that you think you would have changed as far as gameplay goes to Babylon 5, knowing what you know now, essentially?
Simple is better. I mean, if someone handed me the rules now and said, do a pass on it, I would be looking at ways of simplifying and streamlining. The thing about the interesting thing about a collectible card game is it's organic and it's constantly evolving and growing. And at some point you can get to a mass where it's like, my God, what have I got here? It's a Frankenstein. So you want it to be as smooth and elegant as you possibly can be. So all I would say is, if anything, I would probably go in and I would maybe eliminate some rules and streamline it, if at all possible. But I'm pretty happy with the design. I mean, I do know that as the game goes on, it gets a little crazy with how many tokens you can have, like how many shadow tokens you could have, or different, so if I could come up with a way of limiting that somehow, I guess at the end of the day, I might probably put in a rule, just say now, limiting you to the certain total number of tokens that you could accumulate in any one area or one category. And that might keep it from getting a little bit too crazy.
Okay, all right, no worries. And I think, to speak, to game designers out there, simplicity is better. You can always expand upon things, but when you start with a complicated system, and, Tom Brolick, who designed Star Trek and Star Wars for Decipher, he told me the exact same thing. He's like, we started way too complicated. It was way too heavy to go into it. It required, leagues and leagues of learning before you could even get into the fun part of the game. So it's a great lesson to take away.
Yeah, take a look at Magic the Gathering. I mean, the beauty of Garfield's design is it's extremely simple. I mean, it really is. The fact that it's been able to be evolved the way it has is amazing. But the core mechanic, how simple can you get? It's phenomenally simple. So we call it design elegance. That's what you're always looking for. And so build, then cut, streamline down to the essentials, and that's how I would approach Babylon 5 if I went back to it. Who knows? Maybe I'm following on Facebook the effort to get a new Babylon 5 show going, and I light candles, I sacrifice chickens. I would love for that. Just kidding, kids. There's no sacrifice going on. But metaphorically speaking, my prayer goes out that the show would be relaunched, and because it's amazing, and if it does, I'll have to think hard and twice about whether we shouldn't republish the game based on that new show, because it's a great show and a great game.
Yeah, fantastic. And like I said, I'll light some candles too. Unfortunately, I don't have an apartment that would, allow me to sacrifice any chickens, but I definitely will be hoping as well. And I know a lot of the fans will be too. So speaking of fans, I have a question here from Joe Carfley, and he wants to know, and you may be stretching your memory here if it even got decided, but he wants to know, we spoke to those unpublished, that particular unpublished set that you had solicited, and put out orders and stuff for. He wants to know, do you happen to remember for that analog shock set, what the autographs were going to be, if at all, and if there was any new factions being added.
You guys are gonna have to put John Myler and Kevin Stewart on the show. Just gonna have to, those guys were the ones that were doing the individual design at that point in time. I know that we did talk with I believe his name was Robin Laws, about doing a signing. He was an actor on the show, and he had a character that I want to say was a ranger, but memory is so. But he's definitely one that we never managed to conclude a deal with and get in. So it might have been in that expansion. Yeah, we would have just loved to have everybody. I mean, I can't recall if we ever got Jerry Doyle to sign. I would have loved to have him involved. But I mentioned it before. One of the most treasured aspects of working on the game was having a chance to interact with the cast, because they really were great people. And ultimately, I'd like to get all of them to sign and have something in there. But we got a lot. I mean, there's a lot of them that's in the set. So I'm glad for that.
Absolutely. I'm sure the fans are as well. And speaking of those fans, I'm sure they love the fact that you answer those questions. Now, we are running very, very short on time. So I do want to just say thanks to Alexander Schneider, Dylan, who posted on Twitter, Mike Greenless, and a couple of our Discord users for asking some more questions. But we won't be jumping into those just today. But again, if you are watching this show and you want to learn more about the nuts and bolts of that game design, let us know in the comments and stuff like that, or send us an email to the Booster Pack Network. It'll be linked in the description. And let us know you want to see more about Babylon 5 and stuff like that, and hopefully, I'm sure Paul here will be able to put me in touch with some of the other designers, John in particular and stuff, and we can talk about that maybe in a future episode. So one last thing to do on our way out here, Paul. It's a fun way we wrap up every single show. It's basically just lightning round, silly questions, just to purge the weight of some of that heavier stuff just there, and we call that Kraken questions.
Release the Kraken.
I'm terrified right now. I'm terrified.
Trust me, you'll be safe. It's 3 booster packs. They're mocked up booster packs. What they have in them is 4 random silly questions, 3 common questions that can be about anything, and 1 question related to sort of game design or game industry. So all you gotta do is tell me what color pack you'd like me to open. I'll rip it open, ask you the random questions, and we'll go out on that.
Red, violence, blood, bring the red.
All right, so again, 3 common questions, 1 rare game design question we'll save for the end. All right, so common question number 1. If you could be a guest on any game or reality TV show, which one would it be?
Singles Inferno, for sure. The Korean.
Okay.
The women are amazing on that show. I would love to get to know them better.
And like I said, you got the nice wardrobe for it. I bet you could definitely do pretty well in that environment, I'm sure. Very charismatic talker.
The problem for me is going to be winning into the competitions. Those guys on that show they're super studs. They would crush me like an insect. So I'd have to go for the pity appeal.
Play the cards you're dealt. No pun intended. Okay, so silly common question number 2. What is your favorite chain restaurant?
Oh, my favorite chain restaurant. Gosh, I'm gonna have to say Arby's. I love the Arby's. I love the. Hey, we've got the beef.
It's exactly what I was going to say. You beat me to it. All right, Rockin the Arby's. That's awesome. Okay, so last silly question, last common question of the booster pack. If you had to suffer your mortal fate at the hands of a classic horror monster or movie antagonist, who would you want to choose?
So I'm going to take a little bit longer version answer to this. I love villains, and I subscribe to the view that the stronger the villain, the better the show, the better the game, the better everything. So I'm a collector of villains, and actually in my office I have all kinds of villains, pictures and figures and so forth and so on. My favorite villain actually continues to be Maleficent. from Disney. And if I was going to have to be killed by a villain, I would want her to kill me. Because she brings a level that no other villain brings. Because to piss her off, all you have to do is not invite her to a party. That's it, and you're gonna die.
Okay, last question. Rare question, game design question. Uh, if you had to, okay, here we go. You have to express your own life story through a game. What is the genre of that game?
Well, it's going to be a journey quest game. If you look at most of the classic sci-fi and fantasy, essentially the core of the story is it's a journey from point A to point B, and then back to point A, and then to point C. And that's how life is too, right? It's a journey, it's a quest. You think you need this particular magical sword, but really that's not going to help you. You honestly need that. So
All right, so that's about it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Before we get out of here, obviously, be sure to check those links in the description. Obviously, we'll link Paul's webtoon. You can go check that out. And if there's any feedback or questions you have, either email us, let us know in the comments, all that sort of stuff. So that's about it. I can't say how grateful I am to you, Paul, for joining me today, sharing so openly and honestly all of your stories from success to failure. Like, obviously, that's sometimes never a hard thing, never an easy thing to do, but I do appreciate that. And I'm sure the listeners, the fans of games like Babylon 5 or even any of those other games we've talked about, appreciated it as well. So, thank you again so much. Going out, is there anything else you wanted to say before we exit?
yeah, fall 7 times, rise once. Okay. Any creator out there, do not pay any attention to your failures. Continue, go on, rise, rise, rise. And your success will be what you did and the journey that you traveled. It doesn't even matter what anyone else's measurement of your success. Just continue to rise and go forward, and you will have a happy and fulfilled life.
Yeah, I think that message of persistence, especially in any industry, but especially a creative one, right? Like the one we're talking about, one that's so we mentioned noise before, so full of noise. It only takes that one time of getting back up and trying again, and if you don't do that after a failure, you don't know where you're never gonna make it. You're never gonna make it come true. So that's about it. Of course, thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you so much for all your advice and all your answers, Paul. Goodbye from me. Goodbye from you.
Goodbye. Thank you so much, Rands. Take care, and thanks for making the show. See ya.
That's all right. It's been an absolute pleasure. Remember, thank you so much for joining us, guys. And until next time, keep shuffling.